Welcome to the Ben and Tony podcast, and today we have Brennan Agranoff, the 21-year-old founder and owner of e-commerce companies HoopSwagg, PetParty, and Litmitts. He's a very impressive guy. He's been quoted and published in national and international media outlets like CNN, the New York Times, for being an entrepreneur. He's won awards for his company and has founded several companies since the age of 7. Now, by age 14, Brennan was hiring and managing employees for his sock business that soon crossed over $1 million in revenue. And this was the result of several years of entrepreneurship. Brennan can do anything he sets his mind to, and his story is super impressive. I haven't met such a natural entrepreneur who started so young. Not content with just sock e-commerce, Brennan also taught himself how to code and how to do film production. Now just 21 years old, Brennan's story has a long way to go, and I eagerly await to see what he does next.
It's always so impressive to speak to a young entrepreneur who's achieved by the age of 21 what many hope to in their career, and Brennan is a shining example of that. From small beginnings flipping items on eBay at age 7, Brennan clearly caught a bug for internet commerce that has most lately culminated in 2 businesses that do a collective of more than $2 million per year, HoopSwagg and PetParty. With a clear knack for problem solving and systems building, I'm so excited to see where Brennan, now an adult, decides to go next. His story is that of raw entrepreneurship, and he is certainly one to watch.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to get into your story. And your story starts when you were incredibly young. You know, your journey into entrepreneurship started around about the age of 8, which I think is, probably 20 years earlier than most. So tell us a little bit about how your journey started. How did you get into, selling things online, age 8?
Yeah, so I remember I was like at a neighborhood garage sale or something when I was 7 or 8, and found these like locks. Like it was a set of padlocks, and I just remember I was like, oh, these are heavy, so like they're worth a lot, because I guess by like age 8 I hadn't learned that wasn't true. And so I like bought these padlocks for like $2 or whatever, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna flip these on eBay. I didn't even know what eBay really was. My parents had like mentioned that this site where you can sell things, and so I went on eBay and I was like, all right, I'm gonna try to sell these. I think I sold them for like $3 and then didn't charge shipping, and so I like actually ended up losing money. But I thought it was the coolest like thing in the world that I could sell something to someone across the country, not know who they are, and they would pay me for this product. And so then I like fell in love with eBay essentially. And what that kind of led into is like it was like, all right, what can I, basically the fundamentals of selling something, right? What can I get cheaper and sell for more expensive? So I'm scrolling through eBay at like 2 a.m. and I find these like on like the Nintendo DS things, which were like really hot at the time. I figured out you could buy screen protectors and styluses individually, and they were like a cent with free shipping out of China, which made no sense. And we only later figured out the only reason they were doing it was like to boost their feedback. But I figured out you could basically get these things for a cent, but like you'd have to go through thousands of these and just bid on them. So I'd be online bidding on these auctions all night. And so I order them, and they come from China, so they take forever, but they finally show up. I have like 100 little black mailers, all individually packaged, show up on my mailbox. And I was like, okay, great, I have these. And I was like, I'm gonna try reselling them from the US. And so that like sort of worked, I guess. But then what I figured out you could do is if you had bundled them together, so I would take like 5 styluses or 6 styluses, whatever it was, and a screen protector, and I'd create like a starter pack, and then sell that on eBay. Now I could get like $4 or $5 for this on eBay, and it cost me 4 or 5 cents. And so I was like, okay, this is great. I'm going to keep ordering styluses and screen protectors. And you didn't make a bunch on them, but like that was a lot of money to a 9-year-old at the time, making $2 or $3 a thing. But the real thing I was sort of picking up through all this was like I guess the fundamentals of what selling online looks like. And eBay is like the most simplified version of that, but like it helped me start learning, okay, people will pay for stuff. Like how can you create value that people will pay for, as well as like the logistics, I guess, of everything and how to do that. But the other thing I did was like, all right, I live on like a fake farm. I like to call it, like we have goats and chickens. So I took my mom's like old Canon camera out or whatever and was like messing around with it. And I took this picture of like, we've got these goats, and I took a picture of a goat, and I was like, this is kind of a cool picture. So I threw it on eBay as a digital image, and I would literally just email it to people. And I was moving like 10 of these a day at 30 cents.
Fantastic.
Selling these
Amazing.
digital images. And again, later I figured out I was actually losing money after fees, but I would literally just email them, and I thought it was like stock photography at its most basic form, taken by a 9-year-old. But I thought it was the greatest thing. So then I started taking pictures of everything. I was selling pictures of sticks, of like my chickens, of the grass, for God's sake, like everything. And so I did a whole bunch of other sort of small stuff like that, kind of messing around. But it like really gave me a good base, I think, to go off of and keep sort of building on in terms of like understanding how the internet and business works.
Yeah. Did you have any friends who were doing this too? Like, were you doing this on your own? Did something maybe your parents did? Just curious to know where the ideas came from in the first place, or were you just kind of doing it on your own, just came up with you?
My parents were both so my dad ran an analytics company and tried to start up, and my mom has like a background in she would fix computers essentially at a giant advertising agency. And so like my mom wasn't considered an entrepreneur, my dad more so was, but they were definitely encouraging of it. Not like, hey son, you need to go sell things on eBay, but they would like help I guess answer questions, or solve things that I couldn't, or help me point me in the right direction. And like that's a whole nother thing, but definitely lucked out in the parenting department. um but yeah, they were definitely like encouraging of it. But in terms of other friends, no, I mean, I had my other friends were like playing with
Yeah.
Legos. So no, not really.
Yeah, right. They definitely weren't doing this. So how did it dawn on you to pick up a camera and be like, okay, I'm gonna take a photo of this thing and I'm gonna sell that online? Because I mean, that's that's not a easy kind of idea to come across.
So I would scroll through eBay, like, know how people like scroll through YouTube now? Like that was me, 9-year-old me on eBay. Like I would go through all the different categories and all this different stuff, and then I saw other people selling them, and I was like, this looks easy. And I think I was like, all right, I have a camera, I could do this. So I go out there, take a picture. But the initial idea, what came from like looking at what other people were selling on eBay, and like I would love to see like my computer time on eBay.com from ages 9 to 11. um but yeah, I mean, it was just me searching through eBay. I was like, what are other people selling? And you'd like sort by sold listings and see what was selling.
I mean, so it sounds like, from that early age, you started getting the entrepreneurial bug, exploring, experimenting with different things. But you decided to, when did you decide to take that a little bit more seriously? Because I mean, compared to what you're doing now, that's small fish.
Yeah, yeah. So I think by the time I was like 11 or 12, I had gotten into like I had moved into like the shoe game, I guess, where I would run these bots and like buy the limited shoes and then flip those on eBay. And so that started getting me more into expensive price range where you're starting to deal with somewhat real money. You're like 300-400 bucks. It's all of a sudden like not messing around with $2 things anymore. And so I started to get more, I guess, acquainted with real money and that sort of thing. And then so I'm in middle school at the time. Like I must have been 7th grade. And growing up in like Portland, Oregon, everyone's parents here kind of work at Nike, or like a lot of kids do. And so they would show up to school all the time in like the newest, latest, greatest Nike stuff. So they show up in these Nike Elite socks, which are like the socks with the little blocks on the back. And I was like, these are cool. Like everyone's wearing them, so I have to get some, obviously. But I go to get them, and they're like $14, and I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. And I usually forget this, but what I actually did first before I even got into the whole sock thing, I was on like Eastbay or Foot Locker or whatever. They had an ongoing deal that was 3 for 30. So, but they retail for 14. So I would have this eBay listing with all the different colors and sizes, and then I would essentially drop ship them to myself and then ship them back out. I'd wait for 3 orders to come in, buy them, and then ship them, and I'd make my like $2 each. But then I was like, okay, I just like love touching all these socks and being around them. And so then I was like, okay, how can I get more colorful ones? And so found this super like rainbow pair or something on Instagram when it was first starting. And I was like, I need these. So I saved up like my money one summer, and I would like mow the lawn every day to like make my $40 to get this pair of socks. So I buy this pair of socks and they come in the mail. I think they're the coolest thing ever. And so I start wearing them to school, and I'm wearing them to like basketball or whatever. And all my friends are like, where can I get these? Like, where'd you get those? No one's ever seen anything like this.
So
Now,
these aren't branded socks.
these are Nike branded socks that
Oh,
someone had
Nike.
printed on.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, all right, how do you get these? Because they cost $40, and being with what I had already done, I was like, these don't cost $40 to make. Like, how can I make them myself? So did a bunch of research, which basically consisted of like YouTube, online t-shirt forums, talking to local screen printing shops, Yahoo Answers, like literally anyone I could get a hold of to get information on this stuff. I would reach out to and figure out these pieces. And I finally like put the pieces together to figure out where to get some samples done. So I got these samples done that were like quite literally half printed socks because that was the biggest size they had to print on. And I got this galaxy print done, and I thought they were the coolest thing on the planet. And I listed them on eBay to like prove concept essentially. And what I found out was like, all right, people are willing to pay for these. And these were horrible socks. Like, there's literally half printed. So I get them sold on eBay, and I was like, all right, I have proof of concept. Like, this can work. And so then I started looking into like the smallest level of equipment that you would need to get set up, which ended up being around $3,000. And the other, because I had done all this eBay stuff, I like to track all my eBay things. I built these like ridiculous spreadsheets in Excel for like tracking fees and all this stuff. So I was very good at Excel. This was another weird hobby as a kid. I was obsessed with like PowerPoint and Excel. Like it pays off. But
Yeah.
so I'd make presentations about airlines, all sorts of things, but I was really good at Excel. And so I made like a business plan, but it was just like a giant spreadsheet. And I went to my parents and I was like, hey, here's sort of like what it's going to cost. Here is where I think I can make my money back. I've like proved that I can sell them. Here's how long it's going to take, that sort of thing. And the reality was, I think I had to sell like 120 pairs of socks. So it wasn't anything crazy. So I ended up getting like a $3,000 loan from them for this initial equipment, set it up in my garage, and then literally kept selling them on eBay. And that's like what kind of sprung everything to life from there.
And how old were you at the time when you got that loan and decided to kind of take this pretty seriously?
I was 13 at the time.
I mean, that's just incredibly resourceful, right? To actually get the equipment. I mean, I think it's, drop shipping's one thing, but to be producing something yourself is a whole nother ball game. So you're actually kind of going down into your garage every single day, and you're producing socks and selling them online.
Yeah, and the crazy part too is like in retrospect, because I think part of it is because I was 13, I was so naive to the fact that most companies don't do everything. Like
Yeah.
a clothing company would or contract out someone to make their clothing, and they're the ones branding it and selling it. I just assumed that you had to do everything. And like long term, like so grateful that happened and for my naiveness because it's totally paid off and played into what I'm doing now. But yeah, I would literally do the whole process. I would do the shipping. I would do I would get orders, make them in my garage, ship them, and then go keep advertising them.
And were you just, completely bullheaded on this the whole time? Were you just, I'm going to make this work? Or, presumably your friends were doing other things, which might have been a little bit off-putting for you.
I was, I think, more obsessed with the entertainment of the whole system and the process of it all, and the fact that like I can make money from it. I was like, every time I sell a pair of socks, I see a $10 bill show up in front of me, which to a 13-year-old is a lot of money, and like that, and also like I was obsessed with these socks. I was like, well, the more I make, like literally the way I thought about it in my head was, if I sell 2 pairs of these socks, that makes me enough money to be able to keep one for myself. And like I was
Yeah.
just obsessed with them, and before I had a million pairs of socks, that's how it was at first. But yeah, I wasn't like, oh, this is going to work forever. I was like, this is great. I think my goal was like, if I can get over the hump of making my money back, like this worked.
So you mentioned that you entered it with some naivety, which like helped because you were able to do like the whole process, and you just didn't think about how traditionally clothing brands or sock companies would approach it. What were some of the things that you found most challenging that were unexpected when you started doing this?
I think there's a lot of things like when you think through the whole process, right? So you have anything from design. I should have hired a graphic designer. Didn't
Yeah.
know that's what you're supposed to do. I ended up teaching myself graphic design and doing it all myself. Same thing with the website. I didn't know how to do that. I taught myself like coding basic enough to get me by. Like social management. I didn't know how to even use. I didn't have a personal Instagram, so I had to figure out how to take pictures that people would buy from. Working with like influencers, any of the marketing stuff, all the way from like, okay, I've got this sublimation printer. These printers are like horrible, like that you have to babysit these things. How do you fix the mechanical parts on a printer? Anything from that to how the paper and ink works together to the suppliers you order that from. There was all these little pieces which might not individually be that big, but when you put them all together, it starts creating this like sort of hump that you have to get over, and each like sort of problem you solve and kind of keep moving through them. But like even today that it remains the same. There's just constant thing of problems, and but like the more problems you'd solve, the more like creative solutions you'd have to future ones, and faster you could move through them. But it was also what kind of like made it, I was like, okay, this is why other people don't do this, because there's all this stuff you have to get through. And like that was just to get the freaking paper printed so that we could actually press it on a sock, not to mention like the sock color not coming out right, it's the wrong size, the logistics, shipping issues, who do you ship through, like all these little pieces really add up.
I mean, so you're basically doing like an applied MBA through a custom sock store that you're doing online, right? Age 13. So
That, yeah.
so you start to like ramp this up more and more, and and presumably at some point it hits critical mass where you're saying, okay, might have to move this outside of my garage.
Yeah. So when I think I must have been 15 at the time. I still get the timeline mixed up looking in retrospect, but basically I live on like 5 acres, like I said, on like a fake farm. And so I convinced my parents to let me build a warehouse because they wouldn't
Nice.
let they
So
didn't want me to they didn't want me to actually. First what happened was I was like, okay, this garage is like definitely just not doing it anymore. A lot of it was storage. So I was like, okay, can I go get a warehouse? And they were like, no, like we'd have to drive you there. And they're like, you're 14. We don't want you leaving. So what I ended
so
up doing
you problem
was,
solved and said, can I do it on our land?
well, exactly. So what happened though is I was like, can I purchase myself a shipping container and put it on our property? And they were like, no, that's going to look disgusting. So it's like, okay, can I buy a trailer? And they're like, okay, that's fine. So I ended up buying this like giant truck trailer that's still parked on our property and just used it as like sock storage. Um, it literally has not moved in like 9 years or 8 years, whatever it's been. But basically then I was like, okay, we need like more manufacturing space. So we ended up building this warehouse on my parents' property that's like probably like 1,600 square feet, like 500 upstairs, 1,100 downstairs, something like that. And we put the printers in there. We'd have people come work there, and like this was great, and it was slowly kind of evolving. And like during Christmas, it would still be packed, but like this space would work. And then we were only there for maybe year and a half, 2 years, and then it was like, okay, this isn't going to work either. And we ended up moving into like another warehouse space. But I was counting yesterday; we've been to like 6 total now. But it's just kind of crazy to think about the evolution of it all. Moving sucks, but yeah, we slowly grew out of that, and like the funny thing too, looking back, is like, okay, I think I did like $10,000 in sales in my first 12 months, which really doesn't sound like that much. And then the next year it was like, okay, we got to 50. And then it was like, okay, we kept growing and growing and growing. But like really, it was quite slow at first for the first 2 or 3 years. Again, I'm still in school, but and so it wasn't like, it was more for, it wasn't like I'm going to do this thing full time, like I'm dropping out of school type thing. But it was very, very slow growth compared to what it might seem like from the outside.
And is this company that ended up being like, was it called HoopSwag back then, or was the name?
Yeah, registered in 2013 for
Wow,
HoopSwag. So
great.
Amazing.
And I think you mentioned too that there are people like working there with you. Did you have
Yeah.
employees at the time, or it's just like volunteer friends, interns? Like, what was the team?
yeah, so it was me at first for the first year or two, and then we're still in my garage at this point. But I ended up hiring some of my friends' moms. They would like come over. They
Wow.
were employees. Like they'd come over and work in the garage, and it'd be weird because I'm like sitting in class in high school, I'm like a freshman in high school, sitting next to their kid in class, and their mom's texting me a question about the socks. Very bizarre, and like again, thankful to the parents. Like they let a bunch of
Totally.
not random people, but like their friends basically come work out of our garage, which is a little weird. Um, but yeah, we did have people working, and like that was a whole journey in itself.
And
Yeah, so
actually,
you're basically like 14 and hiring and managing people. How did you think about that?
I was terrified, that's for sure. Like I was like confident in my ability to figure things out, except for the people stuff, because like some of that, like you're 14, 15, for God's sake, like you just don't, you're still like in maturing so much as
yeah.
a person. Let alone how do you manage a 40-year-old? Like I have no idea. And so that's kind of like where I guess mentorship from the form of my parents, I would say, like just growing up with that, they're probably like the biggest, like helping me point in the right direction type stuff. But like they were a big piece of that.
And also, I'm just curious to know, like, where does the name HoopSwag come from?
Yeah. So, well, you let a 13-year-old name a company. Um, they're basketball socks, which is where you get hoop from. And like everyone would say swag back then. I was like, this is the coolest word ever. And so hoop swag with one G was taken. That's why I added another G and then got that domain name. And it's been like that ever since.
Worked out. It worked out.
It did.
Um, so the next kind of almost phase of acceleration really for you was when you had the giant media run around about 2017. You mentioned that it basically 3x your business. Tell us about that, and what was it like going through such a period of high growth at that point?
Yeah, so this was actually really interesting, sort of the way the events laid out. So it all sort of started in like November of 2016. I got an email from this company that was called the Sock Game. And like at the time there was two huge companies in the space and the Sock Game was one of them. So like I was honored first off that they knew I existed. Like they had like 400 to 500,000 followers on Instagram. It was huge. And they reached out and they're like, "Hey, we're actually looking to like sell the company. Like, is this ever something you'd be interested in doing?" And at the time, like that was a crazy thought to acquire a company. I mean, I think I was literally 17 at the time or 16 at the time. Um, but I didn't even know what that meant. Like that sounds like this big acquisition thing. And going through that process was interesting itself. But we ended up kind of being like, okay, this is a good path to pursue. And we ended up acquiring them, which that was like a whole long process. But we ended up the acquisition finished in like January, February. And we're like, all right, again, like the entire strategy for all this is like things that we think we should do. There's no like, oh, this is how you do this. My dad was like, "Hey, have you tried anything with like a press release?" And I was like, "What's a press release?" And he's like, "Oh, start looking up press releases and what that actually is." Um, we're like, "Okay, this might be worth trying." So like this is very random, but like my 8th grade PE teacher, who like I was besties with because he would also sell things on eBay. His wife happened to like do PR, whatever that even meant. And so we reached out to her and we're like, "Hey, here's sort of where we're at. What do you have suggestions or thoughts or anything?" And she's like, "Yeah, like this could be a really good story." And she's like, I remember the very first phone call. She was like, "Yeah, like we're gonna get you on Forbes and all these like Business Insider and these other things." And I'm like, "All right, woman, you're crazy. This is gonna be one of those things we try. It doesn't work." Um, but what happened was, so we ended up doing this press release. It was like 17-year-old acquire or HoopSwagg acquires the company, but the whole point is like I was 17 and we're playing off of
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
Fully self-aware of the fact of that. That's like a great headline. So we pitched it for like 2 months, put all this money into this, and she comes back and she's like, "Yeah, like no one actually wants the story. Like sometimes people just don't pick it up, right?" And like I was expecting this from the beginning, so I was like, "All right, whatever. Like it's past. We'll move on." She emails us back the next day and it's like, "Hey, actually just got an email from my contact at CNN. Like they want to do an exclusive interview." And so I was like, "Great. I still don't know what that means, but cool." And what that is, so they set a time for this interview. And they like start, this is over like a week and a half. I got media trained. I like to say, like they threw me in a room with her for like 8 hours for like 3 days and like just asked me the same 4 questions. And she's like, I had to have my answers word for word or whatever. And I was like scared because I'm a 16 or 17-year-old, I guess, talking
Yeah,
to
of
like
course.
CNN.
Right.
Um,
And
and
were you going to be live?
so the initial interview was for an article. So it was just over the phone and she asked me all these questions. It went great. And I'm like, cool. It was supposed to go up. And then they ended up like, so it was on CNN and then some dude from Fox or something did something that was highly inappropriate the day I was supposed to go live. And so they just pushed everything off. And I was like, oh, that's just not going to go up now because they were covering that because that's how news works. And what ended up happening though, is like 3 days later, we just get email. They're like, "Hey, it's live." We're like, "Cool." So we go to like the business section, can't find it. We're like, "Okay, it's not going up. Like something's wrong." And then we go to like the front page, and it's like the main freaking picture on there. It's just like me
What?
smiling with socks. Um, so yeah, it was pretty crazy. And that was like April 20th of 2017. And it's like 7 a.m. I gotta be at school by 8 a.m. And I'm like losing it. I'm like, holy cow, I'm on the front page of CNN.
Your teachers
Um,
must have been reading about you that day.
yeah, so they didn't know until like they figured it out. The whole school figured it out like second period. Because maybe it was no, I remember what happened. I'm sitting in first period in poetry class, and my phone starts blowing up, like all these Twitter notifications, everything. But like what happened was all these other reporters saw the article, like, "Can we do an interview? Can we do an interview? Can we do an interview?" And so I just remember asking my teacher, I'm like, "Yo, dude, like, can I go in the hall? Like, I've got like these like Fox is like trying to call my phone, like they really want to interview me." And the guy thought I was like full of it. And I was like, no, 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 I swear. And then they found the article. And like the whole day, every class period would just look at this article. And it was just funny to me too. On a separate note, like no one knew who I was. And then all of a sudden everyone knew me as Sock Kid. And it seemed to like legitimize everything I had
Wow.
done, even though like nothing really changed. It legitimized all of it overnight, which is just crazy to me that like a media article can do that.
Yeah.
The other kicker for all this was they did not care at all about the press release. The headline was just 17-year-old or sells $1 million in socks. It had nothing to do with the other company. But that was like, it was an even better, catchier headline. And so then I start getting hit up by like local news. So both the local news stations come out here and do interviews with me. And so we do these interviews. And those were even weird. Like I was playing basketball. I was in the middle of a basketball game. I look at my phone and it's like 3 missed calls from the local news station. So I like left the basketball game at halftime, go home, shower, a news truck shows up and they film all this stuff. And then one of those got picked up by the AP or Associated Press, which I guess the way local news works is it essentially means it's distributed to every local news network nationwide, just as a news story. So then I'm showing up on every local news station. And then like that got picked up by all these other basically major publications wanted to do interviews. And so within the matter of like 3 weeks, I had been on pretty much every national news platform. And we had so many inquiries about this, that, and the other, but like our sales were literally like 2-3x what they'd ever been. And those were all ended up being customers that we kept on. But it's just like that whole experience was so nuts to me because all it took was like one article to hit and everything else was just a giant snowball effect.
Yeah, and your personal growth during that time. I mean, it's such an accelerated world around you, right? How were you kind of reflecting on this, or were you just kind of just maybe you were just in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was in the moment, but like also you had to mature pretty quickly because like I was just a goofy 17-year-old at this point in time, and now all of a sudden they're throwing you on like live TV, and you're
Yeah.
like, that's a whole different. You have to be like media trained and know what to do and all of this, and like not that any of it matters that much at the end of the day, but like you're just it's terrifying. But you ended up, I felt like a definitely like a larger sense of legitness, I would say. Even though nothing had changed, it just had been validated, I guess, but by like general public people. But so I was like, all right, I actually do know what I'm doing. Cause up until then, I just been some kid working on a sock company. And then people recognized it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, there was a ton of personal growth within there. Cause then like you have to carry yourself a bit differently too. Cause people started looking at you slightly differently.
I'm thinking, I'm thinking too that this is such a big moment, such a high. That how did you feel about high school at that point? It's like you're being interviewed on national TV, then suddenly you go to chemistry class tomorrow. Did you just how did you deal with that feeling?
I think it was honestly so there's a it's funny because my mom was so worried about this. She was like, I'm so worried that this is going to end up being like a high point and you're going to feel like depressed afterwards because no one cares about you. And in reality, you just go back to normal. Um, but like high school, I think it gave me a lot more perspective in the sense that like high school does not define success at all in terms of the grander, like larger scheme of things. And I was like, I'd be sitting there and I was like, all right, what's the worst case that happens? This test goes wrong, right? And like, who cares? Like, I felt like I had something else to fall back on and like confidence in that, I guess. And also, like, I was a junior in high school, and so I still decided if I'm going to school or not. And I think it gave like a large sort of confidence boost to like, all right, I'm doing something right. And I don't have to go down the traditional path. Not that I wasn't going to do that anyways, but it was definitely like, all right, I might be onto something here. It like gave you a little bit of sense of like I actually am doing something correct. And so it didn't make it more or less meaningful. I think it just gave me like I feel like I had a bit of an advantage in the sense that I had insight into what the real world looks like at that point, and I was like, this doesn't matter as much as it seems to from a high schooler's perspective.
That's so like important because 99.9% of high schoolers don't think that way.
And yeah, no, it's very, I mean, there's no other way you get that perspective. And I'm not saying you need to have
Exactly.
this giant media run, but like, then I've also had other friends who were like the 13, 14-year-olds on Shark Tank. And like, I know how horrible that has been for them though, because like they're at 13 or 14, you get all this attention and you seem famous and then no one cares and you get really depressed and go into some bad places because of like how that, so like, I was very lucky, I think, with the people I had around me. And like I said, I still feel like I lucked out in the parent department. But in just the way things played out. But I think that's also like even my classes in high school, I was like, all right, here's how this connects to the outside world a bit, which gave me a bit more context. So I think it wasn't as bad for me in that regard.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, you're a complete autodidact, right? Basically, the whole way through on every sense. I would imagine that if I was that age and did what you'd done, I'd be completely like blasé about school and be like, okay, I don't care about this anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna drop out at
Let me
this
get out
stage.
of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, you shifted again. You went through kind of another period of transition and growth where you shifted from kind of socks to software. How did that happen? Obviously, you'd been coding a little bit, learning to code during the building of the website. But yeah, go into that.
Yeah, so in high school, I like took my first coding class. Actually, I think I took my first coding class in like fourth grade or something. My mom took me to something, but started learning to code in high school, like my
Yeah.
freshman year. And it was useful for me, like I said, because I had context. I was like, all right, everybody else in this class learns to code. They're going to code some website about their dog or whatever. I'm like, I can go make actual changes on my website that are going to make me more money. And so all of a sudden I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so I ended up picking up how to code there. And like I hadn't done it much for a couple years, but I saw this company launch and they were selling socks with people's dogs on them. And I was like, I already run a sock customization thing. Like there's no reason I shouldn't do this. It's a cooler product. And so I started to get into this, and getting into this, it's like you run into a lot of issues, which is, all right, how do I get someone to actually upload a picture, get it to me, I crop it, turn it into artwork, and then print it out? Like it's a very complex process behind the scenes. And like I literally started doing this in a Google Sheet. And slowly, as I started to like evolve out of this process, I was like, all right, there's some really cool things we can do here when we start building software to do things correctly. And like some really powerful stuff we can do that I kind of ended up discovering through just kind of picking away at the little problems. Like I said, you kind of like get
Yeah.
over one problem, you get over the other. And so then over the past like 2 or 3 years, really, we've started like developing our own software into like, how can we build this sort of customization, personalization machine where it's not just socks anymore. It's like solving real world problems with software in terms of like gifting. So like, for example, you like want to a company wants to like take care of their long-term customers. It's like, all right, they can automatically send a handwritten note and a oven mitt or whatever to their customer, where that gets solving a real world issue with product. But the whole back end to do all of that took me like really, it's taken us about a year and a half to put together, I guess, into actual code. But like it took me 2 years to formulate what that actually needed to look like. Because if I just took a swing at it the first try, I would have like had no idea what I'm building. But like sort of slowly building the pieces and like me being involved in the process of understanding how it all fits together has
Yeah.
made it so that it's so much more powerful, because I also built the manufacturing process. And so how those two connect is a whole nother thing. But definitely moving towards the software stuff, like that's what I get most excited about now, and like I think is most powerful stuff that we're doing.
So in terms of like the actual software development, when you were going through the phase of kind of learning it, how were you thinking about learning this? Were you literally going through YouTube and learning it like that, or were you taking classes specifically in software?
Yeah, so I'd taken a couple like general like HTML, CSS courses, like front end web development, like here's how the internet works type stuff, and I could like
Yeah.
edit code in Shopify and that sort of thing. But the whole systems thing of like databases and servers and all that was a whole foreign thing to me. And honestly, a lot of it was like talking to friends. I've got a lot of friends that I've met through like youth entrepreneurship that are like in tech and would be like, oh, you should do this or that and whatnot. And just like watching other people and observing what other companies have done and are doing, and the way things work. And honestly, just a lot of YouTube of like, you can learn all this stuff on YouTube, and uh, it's specific to sort of what you're doing. You need to change it, but like the core fundamentals of why people, the way the internet works and the way it does, and how to develop software. I picked all of it up from YouTube. It's just a matter of piecing it all together, because YouTube doesn't necessarily do that for you. And then contextualizing it to like what I was doing.
And how was your business empire evolving? Because I know it was around this time, if I'm not mistaken, that you started with just purely selling socks to then building software, and then also you had the film production company and also the agency. Was it around this time that your
Let's talk
business
about the film
started?
production.
Yeah, I was
For
gonna say,
sure.
like, how did all these different things come together?
You
Because
like the,
it was this
there's
time that
this
this happened, right?
there's this like analytical edge of the software development, and then you just decide to go creative and start a film production company.
It's awesome.
So yeah, it's funny how this all fits together. So like I met this kid at my parents were like in high school. My mom was always looking for opportunities, and so she found this Baylor Teen Youth Entrepreneurship thing that was like a contest. So I applied. They like flew me to Baylor to present this presentation with 10 other kids. One of the kids that was there happened to make films. And like I did not speak a single word to this kid, except I was like, I thought drones were fascinating. And he said he had a big drone in his presentation. I was like, oh, like I'm gonna, and I ended up winning the thing. So I win the thing, and I walk up to him and I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? Like with this, I got like $2,000. I was like, I was gonna buy a drone with this. And he was like, oh, that's sick. And like that's all I said to him. And somehow ended up like talking to him later and bonding over drones, I think. But like the kid was super talented at film. And so we were both 17. It was literally a week before all the CNN stuff hit. This happened. And
Oh, okay.
so I got in touch with him, and like a year after that, I got in touch and I ended up in Dallas hanging out with him. And I just thought like the film stuff was like really cool. And so then we are like, okay, he went to school at like LMU or whatever in LA. And he was like, yeah, like we should like travel and film videos for fun. And I was like, okay, but we're not going to pay for it. So we figured out we could basically email these ecom companies, and me being an ecom, I knew you could do this, that they would pay for content. So we basically like spam emailed 1,000, 2,000. We just sit on the phone all night emailing these e-com companies the same email. It was like, hey, we make like we'll sell you a bundle, like pay us $1,000 and we'll give you all this content. Um, way underpriced, but we bundle like 6 of these companies together and then go somewhere with like we take like it'd be us 2 and like 3 models that would shoot the product. And so I kind of figured out how to use a camera because I had to. And like it's a whole different world. It's like a nice little outlet now that I like the way I think about it now. It's definitely like a nice outlet compared to like technical coding and stuff. But like it's you get to travel and do all this fun stuff. And then like this stuff just evolves. And like I said, he's very talented now, kind of handle more of the business stuff, but my stuff was good enough that he could edit it, and that's what he's really good at. And then that kind of like led into he now is like we've done a lot of stuff for like Atlantic music videos and stuff. And now like we're actually we used to have to like spam people to get these jobs, and now people are coming to us for them. But it's been a cool thing on the side where like you can go travel for a week and have a bunch of fun shooting, and like it's way more fun traveling when you have something to do like that because you end up not getting yourself into trouble, but like getting yourself into situations that you wouldn't normally.
Yeah.
And like I have so many stories from that that I really like, cherish those sort of things, and so those experiences. So like super glad I did that, but it's just bizarre that there's like this travel film company that ends up on the side, but a totally cool outlet, and like you learn a lot of stuff from it. So
So cool. Wow, I'm gonna have to press you and say, what's one of your top stories from that?
um well so this kid he's got a massive drone, like definitely commercial drone. So he's flying this drone in a national park. I forget what it's called. It's in Utah. Definitely like he knows it's not okay to fly the drone in the park, but he was doing it anyways, hadn't been caught. And then he ended up getting caught, and we got like chased by cops out of this park, and they took his drone, and he ended up going to court 6 months later to get his drone back. And they took all of our cameras. Like they took like $200,000 worth of cameras out of our cars and all this
Whoa.
stuff. Yeah, we got it all back, but like 6 months later, and it was just a complete mess. But like anything from that to like we got locked in a state park in Hawaii overnight, and they like wouldn't let us out, and all just great times and
Good
stories I'll
times.
cherish later. But very entertaining.
And this was all the while you were still running HoopSwagg, or at that point did it require less involvement from you? Like, were you doing this all together?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty flexible now, and I have been for the past 2 years in terms of I can kind of work from wherever with a laptop. Like the manufacturing, both my parents work full time for the company now, and so they manage a lot of the day to day ops, where I don't have to be on the ground, and like I help develop process, but they're more so like they don't want to go do that stuff that I'm doing travel wise, and a lot of the travel I do is like biz development too. So they handle a lot of the on the ground stuff with the understanding that I kind of go do this other stuff, but I don't necessarily have to be on site.
How have you thought about like the learnings that you've got from maybe the film production side and applying that to the way that you think about coding and software? Or I imagine there's some pretty interesting kind of cross pollination of learnings.
For sure. There's definitely like some direct ones, right? So like for example, the code friend, I like showed him you can write code that does the video editing, like little pieces that he would do repetitively. I would write code for that would like automate those. And for those, like if you're doing video editing, you're not going to be like, oh, how can I go code this? Like that's not the thought process, but that's like how I thought about it. So anything from like a direct like that to just having an understanding of like I came from ecom background and like a lot of my backgrounds in paid ads too. And so I was like, when we're pitching this to companies, it's not, hey, here's content. It's, hey, here's the paid ad that you're going to run with the content we're going to create. Here's why you need this piece of content. Like giving a very structured thing to that is so you're not much selling a product, is more so a like solution to something. And anything from like, because even what I do, I consider it's a couple different categories. You've got anything from like software to like the relationships you build with people to the manufacturing that I do to sourcing from China. Like there's all this different stuff. And even just the pollination between manufacturing as well as the online customization, the e-commerce, and how those all fit together. I built a much more effective piece of software because I have background in all of those. But like also I have ideas all the time for stuff that might not exist because I'm able to take some background that I learned from like how a music video set is run and the logistics of that, and cross pollinate that with how manufacturing is done and maybe the way set design is done. Like there's very random things that most people in those positions wouldn't get without a very like diverse background. In lots of people have diverse backgrounds, but I guess mine's in a very unique set of things.
Super unique. It sounds like you've like taught yourself all these different things, put yourself in all these very like from the outside, very different situations. Like music video at the same time selling socks, learning how to code, and also, I mean, could you tell us more about some of these other ventures that you've put together that fit into your overall empire, like PetParty, Litmitts, and how those came about?
Yeah, so PetParty was just a brand that I spun off for like dogs. That was like the customized dog sock thing, which is how I kind of got into all that. Litmitts was the same exact thing, except it was just for oven mitts. It was just like it's easier to brand it under different sites, and the way it was built, like it didn't matter. It all flowed through the same. So I kind of did those, and it's like at a point where pretty much you could just white label 100 brands if you want. It just gets more expensive because you have to buy domains and all this other stuff for them, and hosting and all that stuff. But that's sort of where those other ones came about. It was just easier for marketing purposes, quite honestly.
Okay.
But yeah.
Would you expand in the future with more brands, or who knows, TBD?
Yeah. So,
Yeah, so actually, a bigger question around that as well. You know, Brennan, what is like you've done so much. Where are you going with this? What happens next?
yeah, I think I'm finally at a point now where, like I said, we've been building this stuff for a while, and we're getting to a point where I think there's a lot of really cool products that I can build on top of the backend that we've built. Anything from like one of the things I'm most excited about was like, in like middle school or high school, you would do like those fundraising campaigns with like you'd sell popcorn or magazines or whatever.
Yeah.
So again, this is some weird little connection I made. So I got hit up by one of them to sell socks in from all the CNN articles and all that stuff. So we get pricing from them, and I learned a lot more about how their models work. Those schools make no money. The companies themselves make all of the money. And so then I was like, okay, how can we develop something better? And it's like we give 35% of revenue back to the schools. It's way more money for them, and they're selling like spiritware essentially instead of the popcorn, which people just don't necessarily want. But like again, that's kind of another one of those things where they crossed roads. But like this is one of those things that we can build fully automated now with all of the stuff we've done, where anyone can go set up a fundraiser, and like I believe that's genuinely helping people, as well as like providing it's overall better. Like it's a win-win-win for everyone. So like that's it's stuff like that I'm excited to build on top of what we've built, and the backend is like a platform that allows me to do that. And then also, like I said, we're going into like more of like B2B sales stuff to like help improve retention on things. And like honestly, at the end of the day, all this stuff is like, at least with my manufacturing stuff, it's how to like better build relationships, like at the core. That's what it is. And so that's really cool. And then outside of that, I don't know. I'm always open to new stuff. Like I just like building things. Like that's fun to me, is seeing how things connect and building complex systems that solve real world issues. And like this is probably the best way to put this. Like the most fascinating thing on the planet to me is like airlines and how they function. And I just think they're the coolest things ever. Everything that goes into it. And like I'm not trying to build an airline, but like that's just an example of like the stuff I like to think about. And so anything I can go into and solve issues like that is kind of where I'm headed. I think I don't really know.
Can you explain a bit more about the airline fascination?
Yeah, like okay, have you ever thought about like how airlines anything from like who decides which flights connect where, what planes are flying, what times they get in, how do you know what like cities they're going to route through, are you using hubs or are you using other models, like what the different prices of runways at different times, the different prices of gates, gate agents, all this stuff. Like they're the most fascinating thing on the planet to me.
I think it really feels like you enjoy complex systems and then simplifying them and making sense of them.
It's like letting a baby be able to function a complex or like be able to interact with a complex system without them knowing they're interacting with a complex system.
I think I'm just hoping that you decide to go in really hard on the airline space. And we've got the next
Got plenty of time.
Mr. Richard Branson on our hands over here.
Yeah, you need a little bit of cash for that, unfortunately.
Well, I'm sure that
Sure, it'll come. I'm sure it'll come.
problems are made to be solved. So
It'll come in time.
Well, Brennan, what would you ideally like to be doing in your current kind of mindset in 20 years' time?
Oh boy. Oh boy, in 20 years time. That's a tough question. I think ideally, like the other thing is like I like really enjoyed the working component of it and like actually solving problems. Whatever I'm doing in 20 years, it would be really cool to sort of have resources to be able to start solving some bigger issues, I think. Like again, I don't know what those exact issues are, but I think like a lot of what I'm doing now is putting myself the same way I've done ever since I started. Is just like continuing to look for new opportunities all the time and like be able to put yourself in a position where you can take advantage of those. And so the opportunities get bigger and bigger. And 20 years from now, I have no idea how big they'll be, or what that will look like. But like that, and also like people are very fascinating, and like a lot of my best ideas have come from interacting with people that I wouldn't traditionally interact with, and so continuing to meet people and kind of taking whatever comes out there. But I don't know, 20 years is a long time. I'll be working on some sort of system or something. Who knows?
Awesome. Well, we would normally ask what advice you'd give to your 18-year-old self, but to be honest, you're not far off your 18-year-old self. So we'll skip that one for the sake of this episode. So the other question that we kind of end with is, what is your favorite rom-com?
Oh gosh, what qualifies as a rom-com?
Oh, you can decide, but we will be the judge
Personal
and jury.
definition.
Oh god, is this like is TV movie? See, I don't watch
Either.
TVs. I listen. Oh god, rom-com. I legit don't. Can you give me one example movie that falls in this category? Just one.
Friends with benefits.
Oh Jesus, unfortunately, I don't know what that is.
Uh,
I'm
Love
uncultured
Actually.
in movies.
Love Actually is another
Love
one. That's a
Actually.
good one.
See, don't know
Haven't
that
seen it?
either.
Oh,
I-
dude.
I don't watch movies or like TV. I watch TV series.
Okay, well, romantic comedy TV series. We can accept that. We can stretch it here.
Romantic comedy TV series. God, does Grey's Anatomy count? I've watched that like 3 times.
You're a big fan, Grey's Anatomy?
I don't know if I'm a huge fan. I think it's incredibly fascinating.
Okay. I mean, you've watched it
But
3
so, yeah,
times. Sounds like
Yeah, I'm a fan.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if it counts, but you know what? If you don't watch that many rom-coms, we're gonna take
I'm
that.
gonna I'm gonna have to work on my rom-com category.
It's an important part of life, man. You know?
Wow. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions.
Okay.
There you are.
I'm thinking too, maybe since we usually the 18-year-old question might not be best for you, but how about what if you were sitting across the table from your 13-year-old self? And what would you say to him right now?
Oh, that's a good question. 13-year-old self. I think I would probably tell myself to like chill out a bit, because I think I was very like stressed as a kid in terms of like I was so nervous about school. Like I get so nervous to take all these tests and everything, the same as any other kid does. But like I think that's the biggest thing I'm grateful for now, is having the understanding that like I wish I could go back and understand that none of it mattered, because I
Yeah.
can't imagine like how much more creative I would have been, or like I guess how much more I could have enjoyed those years knowing that school doesn't matter. Because like I just remember being so stressed about this test I have the next day, and yeah, there's some learning development that goes along with that, like learning to care about things like that. But I kind of wish I knew how little it is in the grand scheme of things, because it just seems so important at the time.
Well, Brennan, that's a great answer. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brennan.